I mean, who really cares what I think? Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and this is the Kiwi Ears Cross Z Reviews Serene. And I feel bad already about all the things I'm about to say about this headphone. At least most of the things. This is a closed back planar driver headphone, which is actually kind of rare, and that makes it kind of interesting. Comes in at a price point of $160 US, which is pretty reasonable. And well, I'll be honest, I don't like it. Now, you might recall earlier this year, I reviewed a bunch of Kiwi Ears' new headphones, and I frankly did not like any of them. The Serene here is probably the best sounding of the bunch. I will say that, but it's also not really saying a ton. And I will say that, for the past couple of weeks, I've had this headphone on hand. I've been living with it, listening to it, experimenting with it, doing operations on it, which we'll talk about, and I'm ready to let you know what I think. Before we do that, though, a quick shout out to Linsole for sending this headphone in for review. If you want to check out the Serene, of course, I'll have them linked in the description down below. But with that said, let's go back to the table. We'll talk about the build quality, physical form factor, what you get inside the box, all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, we're going to talk about the sound here on the Serene, and we'll give it a rating out of 5 stars, as we do on this channel. But anyway, here you go. Here is the box. Here is the packaging. Pretty simple, nice and clean. I dig it. And what you get inside the box is also pretty simple, pretty clean. You get the headphone and you get the cable. So let's talk about the build quality on this cable, which is, as you can tell, kind of like a nylon braided covered cable. It is a decent little headphone cable. It's about 4 foot in length, so pretty nice and optimized for mobile use, which is my personal use. But the cable itself, you might notice, has kind of got some kinkiness going on with it. And this is just something I've seen pretty often whenever I see this design of a cable, where it's got like this tension wound, I don't know if you want to call it a braid or whatever, but it's just, it's a bit of a messiness with the cable. You can probably work it out if you heat it up and maybe, kind of go through it carefully and untwist it and stuff like this. But it is not my favorite construction for a cable because of that. I mean, apart from that, the behavior in the cable is actually kind of nice. So I appreciate that. And it's actually better than, frankly, a lot of headphone cables, but it is nonetheless a little bit kinky and a little bit messy. Now, you do get a little cute Z Reviews logo on the Y-split, along with a Kiwi Ears logo. And you also get a chin slider, which I think is a nice inclusion for a headphone cable. A lot of headphone cables don't include this. This is like common for IEM cables, but I think it's actually helpful on a headphone cable. And here it's actually done better than most IEM cables because it actually stays in place. So I dig that too. Up top you have dual 3.5 mil entry. So that means that if you want to replace the cable on your Serene, very easy to do, very common connector. And then down here on the other end, you just have a standard 3.5 mil termination. There's no adapters or anything in the box. There's no 4.4 mil balance, not even a 6.35 mil adapter. But for me, that's actually fine because I am a 3.5 stan. I'm just maybe a little bit surprised because I don't think Zeos is a 3.5 mil stan, but that is the cable. Let's talk about the headphone. And as you see it here on the table, it probably looks a little generic. And I agree, it's a little bit generic looking. It looks kind of like, I don't know, any other headphone you might find from a random brand on AliExpress or Amazon. It's not badly made, at least for most part, but not much to look at, apart from the fact that I do actually like this color scheme. This is definitely a Zeos inspired color scheme with the purple and black. I think it looks good on this headphone, so I like that. And then the materials themselves are fine. It's pretty lightweight, fairly plasticky, but you do have kind of a leatherette wrapped headband, which is nice, makes it feel a little bit more premium and nice than if it was just straight plastic. And you do also get a Z Reviews logo stamped into the top, which is kind of cool. The padding is relatively modest up here, although I will say, I think people focus too much on how much padding there is in a headband and focus too little on how wide and like how well distributed the weight is, because I think that matters a whole lot more. And you'll notice that this is a relatively narrow headband, although I'll say that the weight on this headphone is pretty lightweight, so I don't think anyone's going to have issues with weight distribution. At least I didn't. The rest of the headphone, you can see you've got plastic ear cups here on the outside, although this looks metal. These arms here are metal, and they've actually got a decent range of adjustability. You can see like how small it gets versus how big it gets. I have kind of a medium size, medium largish head, and I'm wearing it at about that size, just to give you an idea. So it'll definitely accommodate bigger heads than mine, as well as smaller. We'll talk a little bit more about fit and comfort in a bit, but just to highlight too, The ear cups are a little bit on the compact side, and I'll bring in another earphone or another headphone for comparison in a bit. But you know, I didn't really have issues with the size here for my ear. It fits me fine. But if you're looking for something that's super spacious and super large, it's not going to be necessarily what you get here. But you do have pretty familiar kind of pleatherette material for the ear pad, closed and sealed. Maybe you would get a little bit hot and sweaty in there if you're using this for really long listening sessions. I did not. We'll talk more about that in a bit. And then there's also kind of an interesting like a foam padding or something at the back of the ear pad. Now, another thing that's notable about these ear pads is that they are easily removable and uses a pretty traditional kind of skirt style fit. So if you want to do like any pad rolling, you want to try out different ear pads on this thing, see how they change the sound, how they change the comfort, should be a lot of options out there that are compatible. Just note that the ear pads on this are a little bit on the compact side. I was going to say, I was going to bring in my FT1 for comparison, but I already put it away, so never mind. Yeah, just the FT1 pads are maybe like this big in reference. So these are a little bit on the compact side. I'll just throw it on my head, like I told you I was going to do, and talk about the fit and comfort. So yeah, again, it's a lightweight headphone, so I don't really have any issues with weight, pressure, buildup, or over time or anything like that. And then, like I said, the ear cups are a little bit on the small side, but I don't really have any issues with my ear fitting inside. You can see there's maybe not a ton of room for my ear to wiggle around, but I'm perfectly happy with the size, the roominess, the spaciousness of the ear cup inside. I think, again, the bigger issue people might have is just that it might get a little bit sweaty over time just because it is sealed, and that's just kind of par for the course with a closed back headphone using these kind of pleatherette ear pads. Apart from this, so like, I don't know, those things are all kind of fine, right? It's, you know, an inexpensive headphone. It feels relatively inexpensive. It feels a little bit generic, as is, you know, fairly common for these Kiwi ears headphones. Those are all relatively fine. But for me, the biggest issue that I have with the build quality and the construction on this headphone is just there is severe driver flex with it. And if you've not experienced driver flex before, it's basically like when you put a headphone on your head. Mostly I experience this with IEMs, to be honest, but sometimes with headphones. You put a headphone on your head and you push it against the side of your head. You're like, there's like an air volume in here that's being compressed. And because especially it's a closed back headphone, that air doesn't really have anywhere to go apart from to kind of flex the planar driver that's in there. And so what that does is it creates this kind of like crinkling, almost like warping sound. And I don't mean it's doing that to the music that's playing through it. Like, you don't even have to have music playing through it. You'll hear that warping sound. Almost sounds like, imagine like a large sheet of paper and like just kind of like waving it around. Like, whoop, whoop, whoop. It's a little bit of a warbling sound. And it does it pretty severely with this headphone. I definitely noticed it when I first put it on. Kind of forgot about it, to be honest. But then I had my friend Adrian come over. He put these headphones on his head and immediately was like, whoa, what is wrong with them? And it turns out there was nothing really wrong with them. That is apparently a pretty common issue here with the Serene. And so common, in fact, that Zeos has actually made a video talking about how to address it. So he published a video showing how you can remove the ear pads, take off 3 screws on the outside of the driver baffle, which then allows you to remove the entire driver assembly, gain access to the back of the driver, where there's now 8 screws kind of in the perimeter of the driver. And what Zeos recommends is just going around with a screwdriver and just kind of like loosen each of those screws until you hear kind of like a light crinkle, and then tighten it back up. And you don't have to back them out all the way, just kind of loosen them and tighten them back up. And ostensibly that should get rid of the driver crinkle issue, but I'll be honest, I don't know that it made a big difference for me. I mean, maybe if I had 2 sets back to back, I could see that, oh yeah, now it crinkles less, but it still definitely crinkles to the point that, like, even if I'm just like walking around my house wearing this headphone, just like I can hear it crinkling and warping as I wear it, which is, you know, not the most pleasant thing, but it's also, I don't know, for me, it's not really a deal breaker. But it does make this headphone sound or feel overall cheaper than you might expect for $160. So with all that said, let's move on to talking about the sound here on the Serene. And hold up, I'm gonna pull up the frequency response graph that I've measured of the Serene on my rig. If you want to check this out and compare it to about 100 other headphones that I've measured on my rig, I'll have it linked in the description down below. But let's do a little bit of talking about this together. And to start with, if you can, ignore this elephant in the room down here. We'll talk about that in a bit. But from like 300 hertz to about 1,000 hertz, it graphs pretty normal. That is a pretty narrow range of normal. The rest of it is a little bit abnormal. but not necessarily altogether unpleasant. So the upper mid-range here, which is kind of what you see between, let's say, like 1,000 hertz and like 4,000 hertz, this is like the upper mid-range. You can see that it is on the relaxed side, right? And that my heuristic is that I see this and I expect that the vocals are going to sound a little bit kind of back in the mix. They're not going to sound forward. Shouty is a term that people are concerned about. This was definitely not going to sound shouty for anybody if that is a top concern for you. But it is going to have the effect of, making the vocals just not the star of the show here in the sound signature. Then you can see also above that in the treble, apart from kind of this narrow range, the rest of it is pretty relaxed as well. To the point that I would say that this is a dark treble presentation, although this little bit of emphasis that we have here does make it actually sound overall not as dark as I might have expected. I'll say that. Now moving down here to the bass, that I was trying to hide from you. I was trying to obfuscate it so that you didn't know, but now you know. The Serene has a lot of bass in it. And specifically, it's a lot of bass basically from 300 hertz down. You can see that it does roll off pretty significantly down here below, I don't know, we're looking at 40 hertz. And I will also say that it is very seal dependent. So if you don't have a strong seal, this might roll off even more abruptly. I don't know. It didn't necessarily stand out to me as necessarily a rolled off bass presentation or anything like that. So maybe my sweet baby cheeks are giving me a good seal. But you do nonetheless still get a lot of mid bass, upper bass, basically the definition of bass bloat. It gives it in accord with, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for, but combined with the relaxed upper mid-range, relaxed treble, boosted bass, it definitely gives the Serene overall a very warm, bassy, relaxed sound signature, right? If you're looking for something that is super clinical, neutral, this is not the headphone for you. You probably shouldn't have expected that from Zeos, but that is not what this headphone is. This is not like a clear, clinical, clarity-focused sound signature. This is more of a relaxed, kind of warm, tilted, diffuse sound signature. And well, let's talk about maybe more exactly what it sounds like to me on my head. Let me pull up my notes real quick. I will note also, I don't typically do this sort of thing, but because, the recommendation from Zeos, I did do, some burn in on this thing. I ran it on my rig for 2 nights overnight. So it was about 20 hours total of burn in time. And I did the screw mod that Zeos recommended, although I did that afterward. I didn't highlight, I guess I can show you, it doesn't matter. If you want to check it out on Squiggling, I measured the frequency response before and after the burn-in and before and after the screw mod. The short story is it didn't really change significantly. There's a difference you might notice in the bass. I think that is just a difference of the potential variation of seal that I was talking about before. But the rest of the frequency response is basically the same, unchanged post those things, which I think is a good thing. But let's talk about the sound. So I mentioned that the vocals are pretty relaxed here on the Serene. Definitely not forward, definitely not like a vocal focused sound. But interestingly, I found that the effect was less so like putting the vocals kind of like behind the music, but more kind of gave the vocals like an interesting diffuse presentation. Like rather than having the vocals like narrowly focused and kind of like localized in the center of the stereo image that's drawn, it created more of just like this, the vocals are almost kind of like, again, kind of like this diffuse effect, which was not entirely unpleasant. I kind of like that. The treble is definitely on the relaxed side. So if you're looking again for something super incisive, it has a lot of clarity, a lot of separation between instruments and stuff like that. That's not what the Serene does. It is very much kind of like this congealed sound that has still a surprisingly decent amount of texturing to it. That's kind of the part that I really worry about when you have an overly dark sound signature, is it's just gonna sound really flat and dull. And this definitely does sound stuffy in the sense that it's got like too much bass and not enough upper mids, but it doesn't necessarily come like across as like veiled and like smoothed over. Well, at least not entirely. And maybe it was, I don't know. I don't want to get overly into the frequency response and explaining it that way, just to say that it actually has a decent amount of texturing and depth to the sound signature from the top, which, I don't know, again, kind of not unpleasant. Overall, I would say that the sound, just listening to this headphone, is kind of pleasant, even if it's not my preferred sound signature, even if it's definitely not anywhere close to neutral. I didn't find myself upset listening to this headphone. Apart from the bass. The bass is just, it's not the best, guys. It is a lot of bass, and if that's all, that's your main, metric for how you judge a good headphone, well, you might enjoy this more than I did. But it is a lot of kind of upper mid or upper bass. It is kind of the definition of bass bloat. It sounds boomy, it sounds kind of smeary, not very, very well defined. If like you like your kick drums to have a really nice sharp attack about them, it's not what you're gonna get with this kind of a bass presentation. It gives you more of this like kind of bloomy, soft effect that is honestly not my least favorite part about the sound of this headphone. My least favorite part, unfortunately, is the bass rattles the headphone. It rattles the drivers. And kind of again, going back to this recommendation from Zeos to unscrew the headphone, take it apart and loosen those things. I don't remember noticing that effect before I did that, but I also wasn't listening for it. But I definitely notice it now. And basically anytime there is heavy bass in my music, and like, I don't listen to super heavy bassy music, like Men I Trust, Break for Lovers, if you want to check that out. Those little bass hits in there are enough to elicit occasional rattles from the drivers on this headphone. Or, you know, Cigarettes After Sex, they've got a lot of big bloomy basses. Okay, so maybe that's the fault of that music. But even like Khruangbin, I've been listening to Khruangbin lately, and they've just got, you know, some fairly light, thin recordings that have some pretty prominent kick drums in them, and then unfortunately those kick drums are enough to elicit, again, a rattle from the drivers on these things. So I have done everything that I've, I guess, been advised to do to make this the best experience as possible, and unfortunately I'm left with something that I just really can't enjoy. I was going to bring in another headphone for comparison, the Fiio FT1, similar price point, similar closed back headphone. It's a dynamic driver, not as interesting, I guess, as the planar here. But it sounds a lot better to me, and I don't really love the FT1 that much. Interestingly, in comparison, the FT1 sounds really kind of bright and even thin, even though it's actually fairly bass boosted. Also not the tightest of bass on the FT1, but I don't know, it's really just, it's not the main thing that's going to stand out for you when you compare these two headphones. What's really going to stand out is that this is just kind of like this really soft, kind of like enveloping, relaxing sound, whereas the FT1 is closer to a more normal, engaging, treble-focused sound signature. That could be a little bit on the bright side, a little bit abrasive. This one's not going to do that for you. But it is also going to, unfortunately, occasionally rattle the drivers, which for me is just a little bit disqualifying. So I don't know, let me check my notes, make sure I'm not missing anything. But yeah, I don't know. I feel bad. I don't like this headphone. The sound signature is definitely not to my tastes, but I could see a lot of people actually liking the sound here on the Serene, as long as you can avoid like the driver flex, which, okay, I can probably look past the bass rattle, which I'll be honest, I can't look past that. So yeah, I don't know. It's got some charms about it. I think some people will enjoy the sound, but overall for me, this is 1 star out of 5. If you want to check it out, nonetheless, of course, I will have it linked in the description down below, as always. And while you're down there, if you haven't yet, well, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, join me on Discord where you can curse me out or something like that, and I'll catch you on the next super review. Cheers.
Join with the force of reviews. We now have the tools to brave the misleading world of audio fools. Hey, this review is super, and so are you. Grab your headphones, sniff a graph, and share your thoughts in this pursuit.